Hi, I'm Chris, managing partner of Edison Partners and the host of Electrifying Growth. This podcast is all about helping founders and leaders navigate the challenges of scaling their businesses. We get into the strategies, insights, and real-world experiences that fuel growth, because what got you here won't get you there. In this episode, I'm sharing my experiences on both sides as an operator and an investor on scaling your business. Welcome back to Electrifying Growth. Today, thought we'd talk about boards. I think one of the most underutilized aspects of startup, young companies, growth stage companies is the board of directors. We've been saying at Edison, board should be a strategic weapon. Yes, governance is important. Yes, doing all the things that the lawyers want you to do and do them right is important. But I tend to think boards are either, they sort of meet the too informal or too formal, and getting the kind of the just right, call it the Goldilocks board, if you will, is what we're looking for. Something that we've done at Edison for over 30 years is cultivate the Edison Director Network. A pet peeve of mine is seeing more mature growth stage businesses who are PE backed have a bunch of investors on the board along with a CEO. And that to me doesn't help the CEO a whole lot, because the investors are available to you as an entrepreneur if you take investment from outside capital at any time. It's our job. But what you really want are operators, those who've been there and done it, those who can not only empathize with your challenges, but actually give advice from real world versus, you hate to say it, MBAs and spreadsheets. So the bottom line is, to me, as we get into this topic today for just a little while, how do you think about forming your board? Who should be on it? What's the right mix of skill set, et cetera? Is sort of, to me, a topic that could be many, many podcast episodes. But suffice to say, at Edison, I think our track record speaks for itself, where our Edison Director Network is now over a couple hundred people. And alignment wise, we don't pay them. They actually, they look and feel just like an independent board member. To me, that's the real important thing, is independence, free thinking. And what I like to say is our EDNs demand more of CEOs and entrepreneurs more than we do. It's almost like they can be, in many ways, the bad cop to our good cop, because they don't want to waste their time with people who don't want to have their advice. And they also don't want to waste their time with people who think they have all the answers. So if you're an entrepreneur who wants to be comfortable, you stack your board with a bunch of people you know. If you're an entrepreneur who wants to get better and learn from others who've been there and done it, you find people that have been there and done it. And that's what a firm like ours has. Our network should be really valuable to you, not only for people to hire and people to learn from, but people could potentially be on your board. And I know strategic weapon can have like these bad connotations. Oh my God, they're using war analogies. But I think from my perspective, we use that term because it's really the strategy word there. But the weapon being, boards are underutilized. A lot of times boards become show and tell, command performances. If you think about presenting and talking at the board versus really getting into what are the challenges of the business, the one or two key topics can really move the needle either in a quarter or in a year, or what the board interaction should be all about. And so from my perspective, the strategic weapon is just that. Are we using our board of directors to just sort of, again, report to and read off slides? Or are we kind of getting into what are the key issues of the business? So that's what we mean there. I think a board that's constructed with, again, a combination of investors and operators is okay, but all investors aren't going to be that strategic weapon. They're not going to have enough knowledge about the key drivers of the business. Everyone in P is really smart, frankly. So this isn't a knock against me, my partners, or our competitors. Everyone's really smart. But have you scaled a business to 100 to 200 to $300 million in revenue and 30, 40% EBITDA margins? Have you grown it consistently, et cetera, et cetera? That's what our Edison Director Network has in it. And that's frankly what PE firms have in their networks. It's just, they don't use them the same way. And so I think about this conversation I have with other firms in this, and I say to them, why are we putting more independents, more operators on these boards? And it tends to be a bit of control. So if you go through a control transaction, you sell your company to PE and you're still the CEO, a lot of times folks feel comfortable having the board kind of reflect the voting structure. And I just think that's wrong, because I think what we want to do is get your voting rights in the, I like to call them deal documents, the underlying documents for the transaction you did. Give the control to the firm like ours that we need to feel comfortable. And if it's a control deal, if it's a minority deal, it's irrelevant anyway, right? If you're selling 20 or 30% of your business, make your board look like, 20, 30% ownership. That said, I'll talk out of the other side of my mouth. We think a 5-person board is a perfect size for a sub $50 million revenue business. You get up to 7, tend to be 7 and 9 companies in public companies, 7 to 9 people. Those larger people just create more folks to keep up to date, more folks to get alignment. And so people think about big boards and, it's great, isn't it? But at the end of the day, you want people who can really lean in and care. And of course, one of the seats is the CEO. So we're talking about 4 or 5 or 6 outsiders, and the CEO has to keep them up to date. So it gets to be a pretty big job. And so strategic weapon, meaning you're not just talking to these board members at the board meeting 4 or 5 times a year, weekly or monthly, kind of minimum. And I say that your investor, if you've taken one, you're going to have some kind of weekly or every 2-week cadence, most likely. We think best practice is weekly. But your independent board members, you may think weekly is too much, but monthly is not. And certainly monthly to keep them up to date. We have one CEO who's used this term, and I steal it from him, but board amnesia happens. We generally don't have professional board members in our Edison Director Network where they sit on 5 or 6, but they might sit on 2. They might even have a day job where they're still running a company. And to be blunt, their business, unlike the CEO or the founder, it's not the only thing. The board seat's not the only thing they're doing. So the only way to avoid board amnesia at the board meeting is to have some ongoing dialogue. It also creates some trust, a relationship that's built more on the in-between board meetings than the showing up for the 3 or 4 hour command performance. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor for, strategic weapons, strategic value. Governance is clearly a part of the board's job, but frankly, that's sort of a check the box exercise most of the time. Yeah. One of the things as we think about these relationships and not only avoiding board amnesia, but knowing there's a real relationship beyond the board. There's a great video on our website, by the way, for those who want more of this topic. Al Sabloy, who's been a 3-time CEO. He's in the Edison Hall of Fame. We did a little video of him because it's been a 20-year relationship with us, and he's got some really interesting takes on this topic. But the point is, the relationship at an individual level, it happens much more organically than it does with the board dinner or the board meeting. And I think you're not going to have it with all 5 or all 7, well, call it 4 outside members or all 6 outside members. Naturally, there's going to be 1 or 2 that are a little bit further away than others. But in our opinion, a lead director, if you go as far as a chairperson of the board, that's a must. It's got to be more than skin deep, if you will. And the other way that happens is it's a 2-way street. But I will say it's the CEO's job to do the reaching out. It's the CEO's job to make sure the board member is not feeling like they're making the CEO feel like they're running the business. There's nothing more off-putting than for a CEO to think the board's trying to get their stuff. So recognize as the CEO, the reason why it's your job to call them is so that they're not looking like they're trying to get in your business. It's really the opposite from what you're thinking. It's not that they don't care. And I've seen some CEOs who are doing a very good job, but they actually don't think top of mind, I can go call board member X for this question. And sometimes it takes a little repetition and some reminding. So every board meeting, I try and tell our independent directors, these EDN members and other independents, make sure the CEO knows that this is the kind of topic they could call you about. And that there's sort of it may take 6 months, it may take a year before there's a rhythm, but I've seen it work now in a couple of very specific companies where I used to like to say, Edison should be the CEO's first call for all things. At the end of the day, it's great if the EDN member, this operator, is the CEO's first call because they think of them as having knowledge about go-to-market, or you're trying to do an M&A transaction. Hey, you're not getting along with the lead board member from Edison, call the EDN. There's a bunch of ways to use that relationship. What I do like to say now is one of the Edison directors of the first call, and maybe the person we appoint to the board or nominate to the board, or maybe us as the lead board member. But the bottom line is, the trust beyond the meetings, trust only happens with the meetings beyond the meetings. The other thing that happens in boards that is really, a too bad is besides getting the membership right, operating experience, domain expertise, really thinking about what you're missing, not only in your company, but on your board. It's not a popularity contest. This happens in charitable boards. Everyone can relate. If you're on a charitable board, it's like cool to be on a board. So you got a bunch of people who don't actually have any other reason that they want it on their resume, which is kind of crazy. That happens in business boards as well. So first of all, think about curating the skill sets that are needed. Is it domain expertise? Is it functional expertise? Is it strategic because you want to go into a new market? Think about those slots as filling a need. But then on an ongoing basis, there's a set it and forget it aspect of boards, which isn't good. And I think we advocate at Edison a chairperson or a lead director at minimum. And the idea being that person's there to help drive the agenda with the CEO, but as importantly, drive the evaluation of the board with the CEO. Frankly, young is the wrong way to put it because it's not an ageist thing. It's inexperienced CEOs. Think of they've got to be the chairperson of the board because there's an ego involved or it's their baby. All the wrong reasons, because frankly, what that chairperson can help you do is manage your board, resolve conflict, but as importantly, cause the board to evaluate itself on a regular basis. Public companies have to do this. It's actually required by the SEC and the listing exchanges. Private companies don't have to do it, and then they don't do it. So again, a best practice at Edison is on an annual basis, do a board evaluation, a self-evaluation. You should be doing it for all the executives, at least the CEO at a board level as well. But it also creates space for someone to go, you know what? 2 years ago, this looked great. I had lots of time. My life has changed. I'm running a new company. I want to be more retired than not. Who knows what the other board members are thinking, but no one wants to be called out. So it's a chance in a review process to give people a chance to raise their hand, as I like to say. But it also gives that chair or lead director a chance to go, you really didn't show up well last year. Are you sure you're still able to do this? Is your time sufficient? The one that is, you're the one who's constantly creating the conflict at the board. Let's hold the mirror up a little bit. Get hard conversations, and no one's saying they want to do that. But that's why a chair and or a lead director separate from the CEO really becomes a great tool. One of the just practical realities we try to do in our companies is make board seats 2-year or 3-year terms max. They often get renewed, and that's fine. But the idea, if you have a term, a lot of times private companies, unlike public companies, there's not a formal voting. There's not a proxy for a term. So it just, again, it becomes they just keep on going. If you have a 2 or 3-year term, again, beyond the annual review, it creates an opportunity for the board members to sort of reevaluate along with the CEO, along with that chairperson. So highly, highly recommend when you bring someone on, set the term so that everyone understands it. So again, it's not like anyone's getting fired from the board if someone says at the end of 2 years or 3 years, this isn't working anymore. Everyone's life changes. And people who are highly successful board members generally don't like to admit they've got not enough time. So it's, again, a safer zone, if you will, to have that conversation. The quote unquote best case scenario around this trusting relationship from a lead director or a chairperson, where that becomes a go-to almost mentor-mentee beyond a board relationship. That may be a little Pollyanna because at the end of the day, the CEO reports to the board. So you're looking for others to become advisors, mentors, coaches. We have become, over the last 5-8 years, very big on the coaching aspect. We call our center of excellence in the Edison Edge leadership and people, as opposed to recruiting, because that's a function you can get other people to do. There's always this question on the board dynamic. Does it go beyond just the board, and can you get mentorship and coaching from one of your board members or multiple board members? And the answer is it depends. I think a lot of times CEOs feel like because they report to the board, that's a tricky situation to really make it become a mentor coaching kind of relationship. It's great when it works. And I'll refer to that video again. You'll hear Al and Lauren Brown, both successful CEOs, talk about how it happened with them, where Al was the board member for Lauren. Again, that can be somewhat unique. Culture and trust and all that stuff have to be a part of it. But the next best thing, if you will, is finding that you have a coach, bringing a coach in from the outside, someone who is more than just an advisor. So when you ask questions, they're kind of getting inside a little bit and understanding the challenges you have. So we at Edison have taken kind of coaching to a level that's a little bit more formalized. Most of our CEOs have really liked it. There's a concern in diligence that, they're evaluating me. They're looking for my flaws. And really what you end up finding out is the coach is helping you as a CEO think about how you're growing your management team, which management team members are really going to scale and are scaling, and someone that's not a board member to ask hard questions and be a little bit more vulnerable to, because the problem is being vulnerable with your board makes you feel like you're not measuring up. So it's always a challenge to be able to be transparent, show challenges to your board members. That's the best if you can do it, but coaching is phenomenal. And I've got to say, I think too many times the sports analogy isn't deployed in business. The CEOs think they're supposed to have all the answers. They don't. And think about the sports analogy, the Tiger Woods, the Tom Brady's, of course, being an Eagles fan, I'll say the Jalen Hurts. The bottom line is these are all people have relied on their coaches to get better over time. So why is business different? And so the board members have a lot to offer. There's do I trust them? Can I kind of tell them what's troubling me? But if they can't, the mentor mentee is really something that's almost overused. I'm really looking at a coach, someone to ask you hard questions, push you a bit and open up a bit with them, and then kind of figure out what your challenges are and work on those specific challenges. So anyway, that goes beyond sort of this board of directors, board of advisors. Oh, I use someone as a mentor to get advice from. Do I really have someone who's going to push me and help me think about what's going to make me a better CEO and make me a better leader, maybe even help my management team? What's really been cool is we've seen at Edison, this coaching relationship starts at CEO and then they get invited to kind of help coach the management team. And quite frankly, I think this all started out as an experiment 5 or 6 years ago by us. And it's really become one of our most utilized, we call them centers of excellence, our leadership center of excellence. And our operating partner there, Steve Schloss, he does wonders. And for those who are Billions fans, the HBO show Billions, if you remember that, or Showtime, I can't remember which network, but Wendy Rhodes, like I also have a podcast out there. There's another episode where I say the real life Wendy Rhodes. She is phenomenal. She being Julie Moore is one of my guests, and she's as good as it gets next to Steve Schloss. We've kind of lucky at Edison. We've got two of the best coaches I've ever seen in business. That's another podcast that's worth if you wonder what coaches do, how does it work? It's really useful. So the board's one thing, the coach is another. Can they be one and the same? Yes. It probably takes a little bit of a special CEO and board member to pull that off. It's probably the ideal, but I would say it's a little bit more the anomaly than the rule. So let's talk about, after a few minutes, about when things get off the rails. One bad board member, there's cliches about one bad apple wrecking the whole thing, the whole barrel. I think the idea around the boards is everyone knows that maybe someone is being disruptive. Everyone knows that someone's the annoying person who's drilling down on financials. I used to be that board member, by the way, because I grew up as a CFO. So I'd ask a lot of detailed questions that would drive everybody else crazy. And then someone told me, hey, you know what? Why don't you have that conversation outside the board meeting? Do it before, do it after. We all need to grow and learn. And so I think, one, do you have someone who's willing to speak up on your behalf as a CEO? And hopefully as a CEO, you feel strong enough you can do that. But again, not easy. That's why I go back to the lead director, chairperson, who helps, it's not even conflict resolution. It's sometimes you need to create conflict because everyone's dancing around this one or this person who constantly interrupts or just becomes a bit of a derailer. That's the one that everyone sees but doesn't do anything about kind of problem. There's the other problem where you've got multiple investors on a board and they're not aligned. This is why we like to say, two's company, three's a crowd. Frankly, one's ideal. Just take Edison's money. And of course, I jest. But the bottom line is, I think when you get multiple investors, if they're not aligned and they're not doing that before let's just say you've got someone who's already in the company on the cap table and someone else is joining. If there's not a conversation going on, a lot of times CEOs want to control the investor relationship. And I say that with all respect to a CEO. There's paranoia, there's, hey, it's my relationship. But if the two investors haven't spoken a lot in diligence and as you're getting ready to close your transaction and have that alignment conversation, you're headed for an issue down the road. And it may be frustration because the new person underwrote a bigger outcome, bigger valuation. The prior investor wasn't honest about their need for liquidity faster. And now you're a couple of years down the road and that person's growing more frustrated. I think that when you have multiple investors, alignment, transparency, and having those investors speaking outside the board meeting is just absolutely critical. And it doesn't happen as a rule. People say it does, but I've seen it too many times where it's clearly not happening. It puts the CEO in a really tough spot if they're the ones who've got to kind of play referee and bring these two together. Again, another pitch for a lead director. But the long story short is when trust begins to break down, one bad director, one annoying director, one disruptive director, someone else sometimes goes that way to either counteract and balance. And so you got this kind of, this sort of polar opposite magnetic field going on. I think the biggest thing though is you got to take it on quickly because these things tend not to get better. And I see this again. I've made this plug too many times today, but I'll make it again and again. Lead director, chairperson. It's just so much easier for that person to be in that role of bringing people together, calling them out, but it's not calling them out live, right? You're being respectful. You do it outside the board meeting, et cetera. But if something gets really off the rails in a board meeting, that's the person who can kind of throw the flag and go, time out. we're resetting. It's really hard for a CEO to do that. And again, I think CEOs tend to think it's their job to run the board meeting, and it is to a degree. That lead director can make sure schedule, agenda, this question's gone on too long, kind of respectfully say, we're going to take that outside the meeting. All the things it's hard for a CEO not to do because they're reporting to the board. So I think the big lesson is everyone, you see something, say something, the New York subway phrase. But the other best practice, kind of a way to kind of put a big exclamation point on this, is executive session. Again, there's a lot of our own firm's evolution on this. Early days of my career, and for many years, CEO leave, all the outside board members have a conversation, CEO come back in, let's kind of tell them our feedback. I still think that's a good model, but if you got a really strong CEO, the executive session can be just the board members. And if the CEO is a member of the board, have them there. There are times when you do need to meet without the CEO. And the reason why I like the CEO leaving, you don't want the first time you have an executive session without the CEO there to be the time you're like having a big issue with the CEO, right? So if you have a cadence where the executive session is something you just do and the CEO comes in quickly, even if there is ever an issue, it's not like, oh my God, this is that one meeting. So that's a teach their own. And it really will depend on how strong the CEO is willing to listen to criticism live rather than have it be kind of thought through. But that exec session needs to be let it all out, kind of get all the issues on the table. One CEO, I'll give her a shout out, Amanda Eisel at Zealous. I've stolen her idea with my own investors. Amanda has taken this tact of when everyone's still in the room before the board meeting's gone to exec session, get board feedback so the management team can hear it live. Some companies like to have management team members come in and present and leave, a model we use at a lot of portfolio companies. And that's why I give a shout out to Zealous on this one. The management team sits in the whole meeting, so you kind of benefit from each other's kind of presentations. But then at the end, she makes a point to have each director give feedback to the company, to the leadership team, et cetera. And then you do executive session as well. Everyone leaves, but that sort of, it's in the moment after a 4 or 5 hour board meeting to hear kind of what each director's thinking. And of course, when a company's doing well, everyone loves the session. When a company's not, it's harder. But the point is, the challenge is being heard directly by the management team. Think what a benefit that is to the CEO. So you're not having to kind of be, the board's upset about this, and are you getting the message exactly right? Do you sound like you're just, bitching about stuff that's on your mind? It's not really the board's mind. So it serves a lot of purposes. And frankly, as a board member, if the CEO opens that opportunity up, or the lead director or chairperson does, you've got to be an attentive board member during the meeting. And again, a best practice, take some notes. You sit there and listen, you're distracted. I know it sounds like going back to high school or your first job or your notebook, but jot down the things that catch your eye during the board meeting. Because by the 5th or 6th hour after a lunch and after hearing lots of people present, you forget what you heard the first hour, right? So again, exec session, a lot of ways to do it. I think the way I describe an Edison best practice today is CEO stays, but you don't actually hold back. You're respectful and dignified and nice, if you will, but you're giving it like you see it. Second best would be the CEO needs to leave because you just don't have that right level of relationship, or the CEO can't handle the real-time criticism. It could be either one. But then when the whole management team is in one place, getting that feedback, again, I give the shout out to the company that does that so well, but it's been really effective, and frankly, letting people hear good news is also uplifting. And that's a lot of times what happens there too. So let's bring this to a bit of a conclusion and highlight the topic for the day. Boards, board formation, board relationships, and kind of how do you get the most out of your boards, I think are our way to think about this discussion today. Number one, a CEO who is a little more guarded than having their friends and family, the friends of the CEO on the board, that's probably not a recipe for success. And so the idea that you're going outside, first of all, if you're taking money from folks like our firm or other private equity firms or other growth equity firms, you're going to have a board that's not insiders any longer anyway. So frankly, a best practice to those who haven't taken outside money, build your board early before you take outside money. Get a couple of folks who aren't just your friends, but people you respect. And that way, when you do take outside capital, this board formation is going to be something new, and this getting used to other people sizing you up on a quarterly basis. But a second key takeaway is quarterly meetings are nice. The interactions between board meetings are critical. I use the term board amnesia today. Board members have a lot going on in their life, just like you do as running your company. How do you make sure that you're not showing up at the board meeting having to reorient everyone around what the company does, where we stand in our growth, how we're hitting our plan. That in between, that monthly call beyond a monthly communication of an email is really important. And then when we think about executive session and feedback, the forum's got to be right for the CEO and the company. But a best practice we talked about here today is CEO stays, but the board's really comfortable with one another to kind of lay it out and call it like you see it. I'll call it second best, and it used to be first best at Edison, was the CEO leaves and the board members all have their pros and cons, what we're going to convey, bring the CEO back and have a conversation. If you choose that second one, don't have your first executive session at the time you're worried about the CEO doing a good job. So if you're going to do the first one, first of all, you should have an executive session at every meeting. It should be just something you do. That way, when you have a challenge, it's not going to throw everybody for a loop. Why is the board meeting without the management team? Because everyone's seen that movie if you've been around companies long enough. So sort of the repetition is really important. And then I think finally we talked about what beyond the board relationship, why should a CEO think about? And we spent a little time today on coaching. And again, there's some tools on our website. There's a podcast on this topic. Look for Steve Schloss or Julie Moore. Both are two of the best coaches, I think, in the business for helping CEOs in high growth companies. And then there's also a video with Al Sabloy talking about his journey, having led 3 companies and the way he's actually been a phenomenal director and CEO. By the way, it isn't easy. Maybe my last wrap is, because you're a great CEO doesn't mean you're gonna be a great director. The hardest thing for directors, it's sort of like, if you're a great operator, you may not be a great consultant because you want to do. And board members have to get used to your hands are no longer kind of on the weapon. That strategic weapon is you showing up and giving feedback. So you have to be comfortable that as a board member, they're not going to take all your advice. They don't have to. The CEO lives and dies. We have one CEO who likes to say, look, I'm here to give you advice. You have to decide what advice you think is worth taking. And the advice you choose not to take, if it ends up being the right advice, you have to live with that consequence too. It's the right mindset for a CEO to realize that board overall, the strategic weapon, keep that in your mind. Am I getting strategic value versus just reporting? Because if it's the latter, you're wasting a lot of people's time. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.